The most dangerous wound a person carries are the ones no one ever saw happen. Not the dramatic moments, not the fights, not the shouting, the silence. The moment a child looked up at their parent and the parent looked away. Not once, every time. Here's what most people never realize. That child didn't just grow up feeling unloved. They grew up believing that being invisible was their fault. And that belief, it didn't stay in childhood. It followed them into every relationship they ever had, every job, every friendship, every time someone didn't text back. If you've ever felt like you needed to earn the right to exist in a room, this video is for you. Today we're going inside one of the most underexplored psychological patterns in human behavior, the psychology of the ignored child. Not the abused child, not the neglected child in an obvious, visible way. The child who was there, fed, clothed, housed, but emotionally unseen. What we're going to explore today is how that early invisibility doesn't disappear when childhood ends. Instead, it shapeshifts. It becomes the way you chase approval, the way you shrink yourself in relationships, the way you mistake intensity for love, the way you over-explain yourself to people who never asked. By the end of this video, you'll understand a pattern that controls more people than almost any other psychological force, and most of them will never know it's happening. Picture a child, 7 years old. They come home from school. Something happened today, something small, but to them, it was enormous. Maybe they made a friend. Maybe they were embarrassed in class. Maybe they just had a feeling they didn't have words for yet. They find their parent, and they begin to speak. But the parent is on the phone, or watching television, or just tired. The child is given a look that says, "Not now." The child waits. Later, they try again. The moment has passed. No one asks what they wanted to say. So the child learns something that night, not consciously, not in words, but in the deepest, most permanent part of how they understand the world. My feelings are an inconvenience. My presence is too much. I need to shrink to be safe. They don't cry about it. They adjust. And that adjustment becomes a personality. Psychologists call the consistent emotional unavailability of a caregiver invisible neglect. It leaves no marks. It shows up in no reports. But it rewires the nervous system just as powerfully as any visible trauma. Here's the pattern. When a child's emotional needs are consistently ignored, they don't stop having those needs. They learn to hide them. They become experts at reading the room. They watch facial expressions before they speak. They wait for the right moment, the moment that often never comes. They learn that being needed is dangerous, that expressing pain makes people leave, that vulnerability is weakness, that love has to be earned through performance. Watch someone who was ignored as a child. They'll be the most capable person in the room and the last one to ask for help. They'll give everything in relationships and feel guilty for wanting anything back. They'll make themselves indispensable to people because deep inside, they still believe that the only way to be kept is to be useful. That's not a personality trait. That's a survival strategy that outlived its usefulness. Here's where it gets important. The ignored child doesn't just become someone who needs reassurance. They become someone who is allergic to their own needs. This is the concept psychologists call emotional parentification of the self. The child, getting no emotional support from outside, becomes their own caregiver. They suppress, they regulate, they manage. On the surface, they look remarkably composed, functional, even impressive. But internally, there's a system running constantly in the background. A system that is always scanning. Am I too much? Am I enough? Should I say this? Will this make them leave? If I need something, will I be punished for it? This is not anxiety in the clinical, obvious sense. This is a low-frequency hum, a background noise that most people who carry it have simply stopped noticing, because it's always been there. And here is the most important thing. These people don't just tolerate emotional unavailability in others. They recognize it as normal. When someone is warm, consistent, and loving, it feels suspicious. It feels like a trap. It feels like something they need to earn, or it will be taken away. But when someone is unpredictable, hot, and cold, giving just enough attention to keep them hoping, that feels like home. Not because they enjoy the pain, but because the nervous system goes back to what it knows. And what it knows is this: love is something you wait for, something you work for, something that disappears if you're not careful. Now here's what almost no one talks about, because so far you might be thinking, okay, this is about emotionally damaged people. But what if I told you that some of the most powerful people in any room are carrying this exact pattern? the people who never say no, the ones everyone calls strong. What if I told you that the drive for success, the relentless drive, the kind that never feels like enough, is often just an ignored child trying to finally be seen? And here's the darker layer. Because ignored children don't just become overachievers or people pleasers. Some of them go a different direction entirely. Some of them decide, consciously or not, that if being invisible is the default, then the only solution is to become impossible to ignore. They study people. They learn what makes people feel seen, and they use it. Not always maliciously, but strategically. The most skilled manipulators in any social environment often learn those skills in childhood, not from a manual, but from survival. When your emotional needs are never met directly, you learn to get them met indirectly. You learn influence, you learn charm, you learn how to position yourself as indispensable, and you do it so fluently that even you don't realize that's what you're doing. Now picture a different scene. Two adults, a relationship. One partner grows up ignored. The other, let's say, was reasonably seen. The ignored partner gives enormously in this relationship. Their love language is acts of service. They anticipate needs. They show up. They remember everything. But they never ask for anything directly. And when their partner doesn't notice what they need, the ignored partner says nothing. They go quiet. They pull back just slightly. Their partner notices the coldness but doesn't understand where it came from. So they ask, "Are you okay?" And the ignored partner says, "I'm fine." Because asking would be dangerous. Needing would be too much. They'd rather suffer in silence than risk the rejection of being told their needs are an inconvenience. Sounds familiar? Now here's the part that breaks the cycle open. The partner who was reasonably seen, they start to feel like they can never do enough, like they're always failing someone without knowing the rules. Two people, both suffering. One because their needs were ignored in childhood. One because they're trying to love someone who won't let them. This is how the pattern reproduces itself. Not through cruelty, through silence. Here is the core truth. The ignored child becomes an adult who confuses familiarity with love. They confuse enduring pain with being loyal. They confuse silence with dignity. And they confuse the absence of rejection with being accepted. These are not the same things. But to a nervous system trained in early invisibility, they can feel identical. And this is the most important psychological unlock in this entire video. You cannot think your way out of this pattern. You can understand it completely. You can describe it in perfect detail, and still find yourself waiting by the phone for someone who has already shown you who they are. Because the pattern doesn't live in your mind. It lives in your body. It lives in the tightening in your chest when someone goes quiet. It lives in the apology you offer before you've even done anything wrong. It lives in how quickly you can become small to make someone else comfortable. The shift doesn't come from knowing more. The shift comes from learning that the child who was ignored did not deserve to be ignored. Not once, not ever. And the adult that child became does not need to keep paying for a debt they never owed. The ignored child doesn't always look the way you'd expect. They don't always look sad. Sometimes they look like the most accomplished person in the room. Sometimes they look like the one everyone else leans on. Sometimes they look like the person who laughs the loudest, so no one notices they never talk about themselves. They became so good at being invisible that now, even when people want to see them, they don't know how to be found. This is one of the quietest tragedies in human psychology. Not dramatic, not obvious, just a person, somewhere in a crowd, who learned very early that existing out loud was too risky, and has been whispering ever since. If any part of this video felt less like a description of someone else, and more like a description of something you've never quite had the words for, that recognition is not an accident. That recognition is the beginning. Because the child who needed to be seen is still there, and it is never too late to finally look at them. If this video was helpful, like, share, and subscribe to this channel for more psychology insights.